Hello and welcome to English Through Experience. I'm ET Tutor and this is a revision video for Edexcel GCSE English language students who are doing paper 1 section A. I'm making these videos for students who are doing the resits in 2018, but they're going to be useful for anybody else going forward. So in the previous video I analysed question 4 in quite a bit of detail, discussing what markers are looking for, what the assessment objectives are and how to approach the question. So I'm not going to be doing that in a great level of detail here. So if you haven't already seen that video, I suggest you watch that one first. If you have, that's great, we'll carry on. You might want to grab a pen so you can make some notes as I'm talking. Right, so the question is, in this extract there is an attempt to create humour. Evaluate how successfully this is achieved. Support your views with detailed reference to the text. So we're looking to analyse how successful the writer has been in creating humour and how they've done this using the quotes as evidence. So, best thing to do is try to analyse the text as a whole. This time we want as examiners to see that you've understood the overall gist of what is going on here, and this time how it's funny. Yeah, using sight, so talking about the setting, the ideas within here, the themes and the events. So if you've already watched all these videos, you might be thinking, well, it's not funny, it's quite scary and dark, and that's one of the reasons why I've chosen this particular question, to really make you think, just in case anything like this comes up in the exam. Humour is quite tricky for students to analyse, so here we're going to see a few different types of humour and how these work, so it'll be helpful in that respect too. So let's start at the beginning. I'm going to read out this first paragraph and then we can break it down and see what points we can make here. It's always good to get something from the beginning to start your answer off. So, my father's family name being Pirrip and my Christian name Philip, my infant tongue could make of both names nothing longer or more explicit than Pip. So I called myself Pip and came to be called Pip. So the first thing that we can see here is that the language used is quite childlike, especially this last little section here, this last sentence. So I called myself Pip and came to be called Pip. It's not the way an adult would normally speak. So we could start off by observing that this is an attempt to create humour by using repetition to reflect the speech patterns of a child. Okay, so that'd be a nice starting point for us. So we could go straight in with our first sentence and say, there is a clear attempt to create humour throughout the text. This is clear from the offset. So we're talking a little bit about structure as well. By observing it's funny from the beginning, it's a good point that you can possibly come back onto later on. So we've got a bit of an introduction saying the text is very humorous, it starts straight away. We've given an example, so we could give the whole of that final sentence, then re-quote the word Pip because it's repeated previously to argue that it's this sort of comical way of capturing a child's speech. And then we can go on to look at what happens in this second paragraph. So it comes as a bit of a shock, really, that something that seems light-hearted all of a sudden ends up in a graveyard surrounded with this theme of death that carries on throughout the extract as a whole. So what we're getting there is a juxtaposition. We're getting the contrast between the opening paragraph and what we learn in the second paragraph. But this time we've got to address the question focus and try to explain how this is funny. So it's the contrast itself that creates this humour. It's ironic that we're getting this childlike funny voice from a bleak and dark graveyard where the character's surrounded by tombstones. So we've got some irony there. So that's one of the types of humour that you might be able to pick up on in the extract that you're looking at. The next part that we get is the idea that the writer wants us to understand that the narrator is reflecting on their childhood and finding their sort of first fancies, their childish outlook on the world humorous in later life. So again, that's how the writer is attempting to do that. And we can talk about how successful they are by observing the fact that the writer uses some satire in the descriptions of how the character imagines their parents based on the lettering of their tombstones, that this is unreasonable, and that it conjures up images of the dad as being square, stout, with curly black hair, and the mum as being freckled and sickly. So these ideas are supposed to be comical. The writer's giving us a strong insight into the character's thoughts and feelings that they had as a child, and as readers we are supposed to be able to relate to the fact that we do change as we grow, and that most adults would not look at writing on a tombstone and from that writing conjure up an image of the person. So again, it is pretty dark, but these details are being given to try and emphasise the fact that it's humorous at the same time. These childish conclusions and first fancies are humorous. So you'll have talked about setting then, because you'll be talking about the tombstones. You'll be talking about the ideas, because you'll be talking about themes like childhood, death and family. And you'll be talking about the events, because you're saying what it is the character's doing. So you're covering a bit of everything in your analysis of that paragraph and saying, yeah, he does a good job of creating some humour, although it is this dark black humour. And that's seen even more so in the final half of this paragraph, where the character describes their childhood thoughts about their brothers. So let's have a look at that. To 5 little stone lozenges, each about 1.5 feet long, which were arranged in a neat row beside their grave, and were sacred to the memory of my 5 little brothers, who gave up trying to get a living exceedingly early in that universal struggle. I am indebted for a belief I religiously entertained that they had all been born on their backs with their hands in their trouser pockets, and had never taken them out in this state of existence. Okay, so it's a bit tricky to read, but you got the gist of it there. What we're seeing here is the writer conjuring up a strong, humorous image of these poor children who never had a living. So we've got that pun there. The humour comes from this play on word, saying who gave up trying to get a living. We talk about getting a living as in having employment, but here it's actually talking about being alive. And it's this idea of a child perceiving a universal struggle, which again is ironic. Children don't tend to think in this way. And then the image of them being born on their backs with their hands in their trouser pockets and never changing, although it's dark, is at the same time a little bit comical. Right, then we get a change. With these extracts, it's great if you're able to observe the point at which something changes within a text, and this happens a lot in the extracts that are selected. So we've got a contrast. So we've had this humour, and now the setting and the atmosphere really kicks in. So this is where you can pick up some quotes like, this black bleak place overgrown with nettles, possibly the use of the list to emphasise the fact that death is all around this narrator, who we previously thought of as being quite light-hearted and funny. So again, we've got this dark humour, the irony that all of this comical thinking takes place in such a dark place. Then finally, if we come through to the final section, we can actually see we've got a little bit of a cyclic structure going on here, because we've got Pip, who's been struggling to work out who he is. That's what this is all about, him trying to understand his existence in the world despite not having any family. And he talks about how he came to be called Pip, but he was confused about his heritage. And then at the end, we get him being approached by this sort of alarming, frightening character. And at the very end, he wants to know who the little boy is. So he says, "Tell us your name," said the man, "quick." "Pip, sir." "Once more," said the man, staring at me. "Give it, mouth." "Pip, sir." "Pip. Pip, sir." Sorry, my reading is atrocious today. But yes, we've got the idea that we've got this cyclic structure, that we get Pip talking about his name at the beginning, and then even though it's all quite bizarre and frightening, the fact that he comes back to this little voice of him trying to work out who he is and be confident in who he is by repeating it with mouth at the end, again leaves us on quite a confused but kind of feeling that there is some dark humour underlying everything that's happening here. Okay, so that was quite tricky because it was a difficult question. But hopefully, if you had a go at it, you've been able to come up with some similar points. There's other things that you can talk about. There's obviously not one interpretation of a text, but this is a good challenge to see if you can read some humour into something that you might not necessarily naturally find to be sort of laugh out loud funny. Alright then, I will leave it at that. If you've got any questions, just use the comment section below. If you want to download a copy of this, you can find it on the download section of my website, so I'll put a link in the description box for that. And yes, best of luck with it all. Anyone doing those resits, don't panic. I'm sure this time around you'll just be perfectly fine. Alright then, bye.